The day Marcus sold my code to our competitor, he was standing 3 feet away from me, shaking hands with investors and laughing at his own jokes. He had no idea I already knew. He had no idea I had been waiting for exactly that moment for 6 weeks. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story only makes sense if you understand what we built together and what he decided it was worth. It was a Tuesday in early March, around 7 in the morning, when I first noticed something was wrong. Not wrong in a dramatic, cinematic way. Wrong in the way a door is slightly off its frame. You do not see it immediately. You feel it in how the air moves. I was sitting at my desk in the office we shared in a converted warehouse space in the Mitte district, the kind of place that smells like fresh paint and ambition and slightly too much espresso. We had 8 desks, 2 developers besides me, a whiteboard covered in architecture diagrams, and one very expensive espresso machine that Marcus had insisted on buying with company funds because, and I quote, "it signals to investors that we take quality seriously." I had been there since 6. I was always there since 6. That was my rhythm. Coffee, silence, code. By the time the city started moving outside the tall industrial windows, I usually had 3 hours of clean work behind me. Those early hours were mine. Nobody asked questions. Nobody booked meetings. Nobody gave speeches. I was reviewing a pull request from one of our junior developers when I noticed a branch in the Git repository that I did not recognize. Not a feature branch. Not a hotfix. The naming convention was wrong. It was a string of characters that looked almost like a timestamp, but not quite. The kind of thing you generate when you do not want the name to be remembered. I almost scrolled past it. I almost did. Instead, I clicked on it, and what I saw made me sit very still for about 40 seconds, which is a long time to sit still when you are looking at your own code. The branch contained a full export of our core engine. Not documentation. Not an API reference. The actual source. The authentication layer, the data pipeline architecture, the proprietary compression logic we had spent 14 months building. All of it, packaged neatly, committed 2 nights ago at 11:47 p.m. Marcus had committed it under a secondary account. The account username was generic, a string of letters and numbers that meant nothing. But the email address attached to it was 1 letter off from his personal address. The kind of mistake you make when you are confident no one is checking. I closed the laptop slowly. I made myself another coffee. I sat back down and opened the laptop again. Then I did something I'd never done before in 2 years of working together. I opened Marcus's calendar without asking. Marcus and I had met at a startup weekend 4 years earlier. I was the person who stayed up until 3 a.m. making the prototype actually work. He was the person who walked into the pitch room the next morning and made the room believe in it. We were a textbook founding team. I built the thing. He sold the thing. For a while, that was enough. He was genuinely good at what he did. I want to be honest about that, because this story is not about a villain who was always obviously evil. Marcus was charming in the specific way that makes rooms tilt toward him. He remembered names. He laughed at exactly the right moment. He had a way of making you feel like the most important person in the conversation, right up until you were not. We had raised a seed round 18 months in. Not massive, but real. Enough to hire people. Enough to move out of his apartment and into the warehouse space. Enough to feel like we were building something that mattered. Our product was a data infrastructure tool for mid-sized logistics companies. Not glamorous, but genuinely useful. And the retention numbers proved it. Marcus handled investors, partnerships, sales. I handled architecture, the development team, security. We had a shareholders agreement. We had vesting schedules. We had, I thought, trust. What I found in his calendar that Tuesday morning was a series of meetings over the past 3 weeks with a company called Vertex Logistics Tech. I recognized the name immediately. They were a well-funded competitor who had been trying to build a similar product for 2 years and failing. Their last round of funding had come with pressure to show results. I had read about it in a trade newsletter and filed it away as background noise. The meetings were marked as partnership discussions. That was not unusual. Marcus had dozens of those. What was unusual was that they were not in our shared calendar. They were only in his personal one, which he had left synced to the company system without realizing I had access. I counted 7 meetings in 3 weeks. I did not confront him. Not that morning. Not that week. Instead, I went back to the Git logs and I started reading very carefully. Here is something non-technical people do not fully appreciate about source code. It is not just instructions for a machine. It is a record of decisions. Every commit is a timestamp of a thought. Every branch is a choice someone made at a specific moment. When you know how to read it, a repository is almost like a diary. I spent 3 evenings going through 6 months of history. What I found was a pattern. Small, careful, deliberate. Someone had been extracting pieces of the codebase over time, not in one large pull, but in incremental exports, the kind that would not trigger our automated size alerts. The branch I had found was the final assembly. Everything collected in one place, ready to hand over. I also found something else, something that made my stomach drop in a different direction entirely. 4 months ago, I had built a module into our authentication layer that I called internally the Canary. It was a honeypot, a piece of code that looked functional, looked like it was part of the core system, but was actually a dead end with a unique license key embedded in it. If anyone tried to deploy our software using that module, the license key would phone home. It would send a silent ping to a monitoring address I controlled, along with the IP address and timestamp of the deployment attempt. I had built it after a conversation with a lawyer friend who told me that in IP theft cases, the hardest part is proving the stolen code was actually used. The Canary was my answer to that problem. I had built it 9 months ago, before I had any specific reason to suspect Marcus. Call it professional paranoia. Call it the instinct of someone who had seen too many startup post-mortems. The Canary had fired. Twice. The first ping had come from a server registered to a cloud hosting provider. The second, 3 days later, had come from an IP address that resolved to Vertex Logistics Tech's development environment. I sat with that information for a long time. Then I called my lawyer. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my professional life, because I had to keep showing up to work and acting normal. Marcus was in a good mood those weeks, expansively good, the kind of good that, in retrospect, was the mood of someone who believed he had already won. He brought pastries to the office. He gave a little speech about how we were entering a new phase of growth. He talked about our upcoming demo day with investor Hartman Capital, as if it were a coronation. Demo day was 6 weeks out. It was the most important event on our calendar. Hartman Capital was our potential Series A lead. A successful presentation would mean enough runway to scale for 2 years. The whole company knew what it meant. Marcus started talking about it constantly, about his vision for the pitch, about the narrative arc, about how he was going to walk the room through the market opportunity. He used the word narrative a lot in those weeks. He was very interested in narrative. What he was less interested in was the technical demonstration. He kept suggesting we simplify it, make it shorter, lead with market size, not architecture. At one point he said, in a team meeting, that investors at this stage do not care how the engine works, they care about the car. I nodded and wrote that down in my notebook. I wrote a lot of things down in my notebook during those weeks. Outside of work, I was doing other things. I was having my lawyer send a formal preservation notice to Vertex Logistics Tech, worded carefully enough that it would not alert them to the full scope of what I knew, but would create a legal timestamp. I was compiling a document that contained the Git logs, the Canary ping records with IP resolution, the calendar entries, and a timeline of the branch creation mapped against Marcus's known movements. I was also, quietly, talking to our 2 other investors, the angels from the seed round, explaining in broad terms that there might be a governance issue before demo day, and asking them to attend in person. I did not tell Marcus any of this. I did not change my behavior at the office by a single visible degree. Every morning I made coffee. Every morning I sat at my desk. Every morning Marcus walked in 40 minutes after me, louder than the room required, and I said good morning and meant nothing by it. The arrogance escalated about 2 weeks before demo day. We had a prep call with Hartman Capital's associate, a sharp woman named Priya, who was doing due diligence on the technical side. She asked detailed questions about our IP ownership, our code base architecture, and our development roadmap. Standard stuff, but important. Marcus handled the call. I was on the line, but he had asked me the night before to let him lead it. He said he wanted to control the narrative. There was that word again. At one point, Priya asked about our defensibility. What was the moat? What made our technology hard to replicate? Marcus said something I will not forget. He said, honestly, the technology is important, but it is also replaceable. Good engineers can rebuild an engine. What you cannot replace is relationships. What you cannot replicate is the trust we have built in this market. That is our real moat. Priya made a sound that was not quite agreement. I made a sound that was nothing at all. After the call, Marcus was pleased with himself. He came over to my desk and said he thought that went really well. I said yes. He said Priya seemed sharp. I said yes. He said the demo day was going to be a turning point. I said yes. He poured himself a coffee from the expensive machine and went back to his desk. I opened my monitoring dashboard and checked the canary. No new pings. I opened my lawyer's last email. I read it again. Then I closed everything and went back to work. 2 more weeks. The night before demo day, I stayed in the office until midnight. Not because I was nervous. I was past nervous. I was in the specific calm that comes after a decision has been made and the only thing left is execution. I updated the technical demonstration. I made it longer, not shorter. I added a section on our IP architecture that included, without explanation, a slide showing our license key management system and our deployment monitoring. I added a live component where I would run a query in real time against our monitoring logs. I practiced the timing. I knew exactly what I was going to say and exactly when I was going to say it. I also printed 3 copies of the document my lawyer had prepared. One for Priya and the Hartman Capital team, one for our 2 angel investors, one for the record. I put them in a folder in my bag. I turned off the lights. I locked the door. I went home and slept for 6 hours, which was more than I expected. Demo day was held in Hartman Capital's offices on the 14th floor of a glass building near the river. The kind of room that is designed to make you feel like the future is being decided here, because it is, and they want you to remember that. There were about 30 people in the room. Hartman partners and associates. Our 2 angel investors who had flown in as I had asked. A few advisors. A journalist from a startup publication who had been invited to observe. Marcus arrived in a new jacket. He was in full performance mode from the moment he walked in, working the room, remembering names, laughing at exactly the right moments. I watched him do it from across the room and felt something close to admiration, the purely technical admiration you feel for a machine that is very good at one specific function. He did not know about the folder in my bag. He did not know the angels were there at my request. He did not know that Priya had agreed, after a quiet call 2 days earlier, to ask a specific question during the Q&A. The presentation started at 2 o'clock. Marcus went first. He was excellent. He always was. The market slide was clean. The customer story was compelling. The revenue traction chart moved in the right direction. He talked about vision and relationships and the trust they had built. He said technology was a foundation, but relationships were the structure. The room was with him. Then it was my turn. I had 12 minutes for the technical section. I used 14. I walked through the architecture. I explained the compression logic and why it was genuinely novel. I showed the customer retention data broken down by feature usage. I showed the deployment pipeline. I was precise and clear, and I did not use the word narrative once. Then I got to the IP protection slide. I said, one thing we take very seriously is protecting what we have built. We have implemented a multi-layer IP protection system, including embedded license verification and what I call a canary architecture. This is a monitoring system that allows us to detect unauthorized deployment of our codebase in real time. I pulled up the live monitoring dashboard on the presentation screen. I said, this dashboard shows every deployment event associated with our license keys. I can run a query right now showing activity from the past 90 days. I ran the query. The 2 canary pings appeared on screen. Timestamps, IP addresses, the unique license key identifier. I said, these 2 events here represent deployment attempts using our core module from an IP address that resolves to a third-party server and subsequently to the development environment of a company called Vertex Logistics Tech. The room was very quiet. I said, we have the full Git history showing how this code was extracted from our repository. We have the timeline. We have the legal documentation. Copies are available for anyone who would like to review them. I did not look at Marcus while I said any of this. I looked at Priya. I looked at the angels. I looked at the journalist who had stopped taking notes and started recording on his phone. Then I looked at Marcus. He was very still. The new jacket looked expensive. He was the colour of someone who has just understood something they cannot undo. Priya asked her question exactly as we had discussed. She said, can you confirm that the current shareholders' agreement addresses IP ownership clearly, and that both founders are bound by non-compete and non-disclosure provisions? I said, yes. I said the agreement was executed 18 months ago and had been reviewed by counsel. I said I had a copy available. I did not say anything else. I did not need to. Marcus spoke. He said, I think there is some context here that is missing. He said the Vertex conversations were exploratory. He said he had been looking at partnership models, not IP transfers. He said the branch in the repository was a backup, a personal archive, not an intentional export. He was talking faster than his usual rhythm. One of the Hartman partners, a quiet man named Gerber, who had not said a word all afternoon, asked a single question. He said, "When you say personal archive, where was it archived to?" Marcus did not answer immediately. Gerber said, "Because if the Canary module fired from Vertex's development environment, the code was not archived. It was deployed." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. I want to be honest about what that silence felt like, because I have seen versions of this story told where the narrator stands triumphant and radiant while the betrayer crumbles. That is not what it felt like. It felt like watching a building you helped construct come apart, even if the building needed to come apart, even if you were the one who pulled the right wire at the right moment. There is no clean feeling in that. Marcus tried again. He said the data was being taken out of context. He said he had always acted in the company's best interests. He said he was the one who had built the relationships that got us into this room in the first place. One of the angels, a woman named Claudia, who had written our first check and who I had always respected, said very quietly, "Marcus, stop talking." He stopped. For a moment he looked at me with an expression I had not seen on him before. Not anger. Not shame. Something more confused than either, like a person who had been so certain of their map that they could not process the terrain not matching. Then he looked at the table. Gerber said the session would pause for a brief recess. During the recess, I stood near the window with a glass of water and looked at the river. The afternoon light was doing something specific to the water, breaking it into small, moving pieces. I thought about the first time Marcus and I had pitched together, in a conference room half this size, with a prototype that crashed twice during the demo. I thought about how we had laughed about it afterward in a bar nearby, the specific relief laughter of people who have survived something embarrassing together. I thought about the espresso machine. I thought about the word narrative. Claudia came and stood next to me. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "You knew for a while, didn't you?" I said yes. She said, "Why didn't you come to us sooner?" I said, "Because I needed proof. Not suspicion. Suspicion splits a company. Proof resolves it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That was the right call." That was the only validation I needed, and I had not realized until that moment how much I had needed it. The formal consequences unfolded over the following 6 weeks, which is both faster and slower than you expect when you are living through it. Hartman Capital withdrew from the Series A process. Gerber sent a polite email citing the need to reassess the governance situation before proceeding. The door was not closed permanently, he said, but it was closed for now. The shareholders' agreement had a clause, which I had insisted on during drafting, and which Marcus had signed without objecting, because he had not expected it to ever matter, that provided for forced buyout of shares in the event of a material breach of fiduciary duty. IP theft qualified. Our lawyers filed the notice. Marcus hired his own lawyer. There were 3 weeks of back and forth. In the end, he accepted the buyout terms, which were not generous, because the alternative was litigation that would have required him to explain the Vertex meetings and the Git logs and the canary pings in a courtroom, and he did not want that on record. Vertex Logistics Tech received a cease and desist from our lawyers and a separate notice regarding the unauthorized use of our codebase. They had not yet shipped a product using our code, which was fortunate for them and for us. They deleted the repository and sent a carefully worded response, claiming their engineers had used the code only for evaluation purposes under a misunderstanding of licensing terms. We did not pursue it further. We did not need to. The preservation notice and the correspondence existed. If they ever shipped something that looked like our engine, we had the paper trail. The journalist published a piece. It was not a hit piece. It was a careful, factual account of what had happened, citing public records and on-the-record statements. It mentioned Marcus by name. It mentioned the Canary architecture. It mentioned the demo day confrontation. I did not speak to the journalist directly. I did not need to. The facts spoke in their own voice, which is quieter and more durable than any statement I could have made. Marcus's network is a particular kind of ecosystem. Startup founders, angel investors, accelerator mentors, conference speakers. It is not large. It is dense. Everyone knows everyone. Reputation travels fast in dense networks, and it travels faster in one direction than the other. I heard from Claudia, 3 months later, that Marcus had been quietly removed from 2 advisory boards, and that a partnership conversation he had been having with a growth stage company had ended without explanation. I heard this once. I did not ask for updates after that. The company did not collapse. I want to be clear about that, because in a lot of these stories the ending is either triumphant scale or total ruin, and the truth was neither. After Marcus left, we were a smaller team with a smaller vision and a cleaner structure. I brought in a part-time CFO on a fractional basis. I talked to the angels about a bridge round, smaller than the Series A would have been, enough to keep the lights on and the product improving. Claudia led it. We closed it in 5 weeks. We lost 2 customers during the uncertainty. We kept 8. We signed 3 new ones in the quarter after Marcus left, partly because the product was genuinely good, and partly because I was now doing my own customer calls. And customers, it turns out, sometimes like talking directly to the person who built the thing. I hired a new business development person 6 months later. Her name was Sarah. She was less charismatic than Marcus, and significantly more reliable. She asked for a clear commission structure in writing before she started. I respected that enormously. I gave her one. I also did something I should have done 2 years earlier. I had a proper legal review of our IP ownership documentation, our employment contracts, our data handling policies, and our shareholder agreement. I paid a real IP lawyer real money to make sure every piece of the foundation was solid. It cost more than the espresso machine. It was worth more than the espresso machine. The espresso machine, for what it is worth, is still in the office. I kept it, not as a monument to Marcus or to the money he spent on it. I kept it because it makes good coffee. And good coffee is good coffee regardless of who bought it or what they thought it signaled. Every morning I make a cup. Every morning I sit at my desk. The city moves outside the tall industrial windows. I have 3 hours of clean work before the day begins. Some mornings I think about that Tuesday in March when I almost scrolled past the branch in the repository. I think about the 40 seconds I sat still. I think about how many things in life turn on the difference between almost and not. There is a specific kind of loneliness in building something with someone and then having to dismantle what you built together, even when dismantling it is the right thing. I do not think that loneliness is a weakness. I think it is just honest. You cannot spend 2 years trusting someone completely and then feel nothing when that trust turns out to have been misplaced. If you feel nothing, you were not really trusting them in the first place. What I can tell you is that the loneliness has a shape, and the shape changes over time. In the first weeks after demo day, it was sharp and constant, the kind of thing you feel in the chest when you breathe in too fast. By the 3rd month, it was more like background noise, present but not overwhelming. By the 6th month, it was mostly gone, replaced by something quieter and more useful, a kind of clarity about what I wanted the next version of this work to look like. I wanted it smaller, cleaner, built on paper instead of gut feeling. Not because gut feeling is worthless. My gut feeling had told me something was wrong on that Tuesday morning. My gut feeling had made me click the branch instead of scrolling past. But gut feeling is a signal, not a structure. You need both. You need the instinct that tells you to look, and you need the documentation that tells the room what you found. I know that now in a way I did not know it before. I know it in the specific way you only know things that cost you something to learn. People ask me sometimes when I tell this story whether I am angry at Marcus, whether I hate him, whether I wish things had gone differently. The honest answer to all 3 questions is less than you would think. Anger is expensive. It costs attention and energy that I would rather spend on code. I do not hate him because hating someone requires maintaining an ongoing interest in them, and I have more interesting things to be interested in. Whether I wish things had gone differently depends on which version of differently you mean. Do I wish he had not sold the code? Obviously. Do I wish I had caught it sooner? Yes. Do I wish I had never built the company with him at all? No. And I have thought about that carefully, because the company is real. The product is real. The customers are real. The team is real. Those things exist because 2 people with different skills decided to build something together, and one of them betrayed the other, and the other one had built a canary in the code 9 months before he needed it. The canary exists, but because I am the kind of person who thinks about what happens when trust fails. That is not a comfortable thing to be, but it turned out to be a useful thing to be. I will take useful over comfortable most days. Last month, I was in a coffee shop near the office, the kind of place where the tables are too small and the music is too loud, but the coffee is worth it. And I opened my laptop to review a contract. A new partnership agreement, smaller than the ones Marcus used to pursue, more careful, more specific, with clear IP ownership clauses and a mutual non-disclosure with teeth. I read every line. I made 2 small changes. I sent it back to the other party's lawyer with my comments. Then I closed the laptop and drank my coffee and watched the street outside for a few minutes. Just the ordinary Tuesday morning street. People walking, a delivery cyclist, a woman with a stroller, the light doing what light does in the morning, arriving at angles that make ordinary things look briefly important. I thought about Marcus in his new jacket, standing at the window during that recess at demo day, looking at the same river I had been looking at. I wondered what he had been thinking. I wondered if he had understood in that moment that the thing he had underestimated was not my code. It was my patience. That is the thing about people who build systems for a living. We think in timelines. We think in dependencies. We think about what happens 3 steps from now when the condition is met. We are not always the loudest person in the room. We are not always the most charming. We do not always have the best jacket. But we do tend to remember to check the logs. And sometimes, if we are paying attention, we build the canary before we need it. The coffee was good. The street was ordinary. The contract was solid. That was enough. That was more than enough.